How's it going, guys? Forrest Gump here, and we're going to be doing the next Unreal tutorial. What are we on, episode 4? Picking up right where we left off, and today we're going to be messing with player controller stuff. This is another really important thing to understand, and understand how to deal with in this game engine and in your game that you're making. So what we're going to do today is basically we're going to add our first character, and we're going to set him up with some controls, and we're going to talk all about that. This is probably going to differ from what you're doing, unless you're also doing a first-person character. But I'm going to do it in a first-person way. But if you're doing some other controller setup, you're probably going to have to look some things up and adapt some of the math a little bit and set up for your controls. Alright, so we do have a player controller from last episode, but it doesn't do anything. So since this loads with our level as the player controller, this is the player controller that we could set up all our hotkeys and stuff in. But if you're controlling a specific player, and that's the only thing you're going to be controlling, you probably just want to set up the controls on your character that you're implementing and spawning in the world. Now, if you have global stuff that you can control in your world, you might want to set up a lot of your controls in the player controller. There's a little bit of flexibility. So keep that in mind. We're probably not going to do it here in this episode, but a lot of times you do see a lot of controls implemented here. It just depends on whether it should be kind of a global thing for your world or level that you're loading, or whether it's really specific to one thing. Alright, so let's dive in. First thing we're going to do is we're going to make a blueprint class and make a character. So characters have some default components. We'll just call this FPS character. 01's fine, sure. Open it up and we see we get some defaults. Basically you get a collision capsule, you get a little arrow that points towards what would be considered the front. This doesn't render in world, it's just for viewing the mesh. And we get a mesh that is blank, but if we go down to the details, we'll see that we can fill it out with something if we want. And we get a character movement component. This is the default one that comes with Unreal. It's very handy because it basically sets up all your initial walking and movement and falling and jumping. It has all that stuff somewhat pre-programmed, and you can adjust the values. And if you're making your own from scratch, it's basically stuff you would want anyway, plus a little more. So yeah, you might as well just use this player character. Alright, so what I like to do is, since this is a first person character, well, we're going to need a camera. There's no camera here. So we're going to need to add that. So we're just going to go add component. We're going to start with a spring arm. This is essentially a camera boom to kind of place it where we want. There's the spring arm. And then under that, we're going to add a camera. There we go, there's a camera. So you just use this add and it works. Alright, so we're going to, rather than move the camera around, we're going to adjust the spring arm for the most part. So we're going to just shorten this up, bring it forward. And we could also move it up a little bit. We'll just do that with its transform here. And just move it up. And we'll get a little bit of an initial setup here. You could also tilt it a little bit, but we will tilt it later with maybe some look controls. So for now, we're just going to leave it just slightly behind the model, and we can adjust this as needed in this arm length. This can also be adjusted in code. So you'll see in a lot of like third-person games, sometimes this boom will change if you're next to a wall. You don't want the camera to go in a wall. So that's kind of the point of this whole spring arm thing, is to be able to get a little more control over exactly where your camera is at. Now, I would say technically, if you're in a first-person character and your camera is kind of always set at hypothetically head level, you probably don't necessarily need a spring arm, but we're going to do it anyway, just so we can use that for rotating and stuff. Alright, so we hit compile on that, and we are good to go. Now, the next thing we'll want to do is go to our event graph and think about controls. Now, to add controls, there's like, I think you can add inputs here, or add input controls, or you add like gamepad events, but it's not recommended to use these because not very easily translatable. Like, you'd have to redo a lot of code. For example, if you wanted to also put in for like keyboard key down. So yeah, keyboard events. You could do this with a bunch of things, but it's going to get messy, and there's going to be a lot of, like, depending on what platform, whether you're playing your game on a Switch or on a keyboard or an Xbox or whatever, you're going to need to make a million different ones. So there's a slightly better way, and that is basically to use input. We're going to make a new folder here, enhanced input. It's like the Unreal's latest system. We're going to make an input folder. I'm going to open that up. We're going to add under input here some input actions, and we're gonna map all those later. So we're gonna start out with some actions. We're gonna have like a forward, which will also handle backwards, forward, backwards. We'll just duplicate that, name this one strafe for going left, right. Some standard first person stuff. We'll just keep duplicating these here for a second. We'll make let's make a look as well. And then maybe we'll also make a jump. So that should be enough to start. Forward, strafe, jump, look. Pretty standard initial controls there. Of course, you're going to want more for whatever game you're making. Let's do forward first. So we're going to open this up. I think it opened behind somewhere. There it is. And we're just going to dock this so we get one editor. Yeah, sometimes it opens in its own separate window. All right, so we go to our forward controls, and you see it's set up to value type action here, bool. We just want this to be a 1D float, so it's just basically a standard float. So it can be basically a positive or a negative value, which is what we want for forwards or backwards. We're going to think, forward, positive, negative, backwards. And that is it, really. We can close that. Go to the next one, which is jump. Jump is just going to be a bool, so you either are jumping or not. So it's a kind of a true or false. We can leave that. We actually don't need to do anything. Let's go to our look. And this one is going to be a 2D because we want an X and a Y for, looking to the side, which is yaw, or looking up and down, which is your pitch. So we're going to need 2 for that. We're not going to put the modifiers on these. We'll do that here in a second when we add context, but these are the main actions. And strafe should also just be a 1D float for left or right. We're going to consider right the positive value and left the negative value. So let's go ahead and context those up. To do that, we go back to input and make input mapping context. So this is going to be our just first person controls, basically. Mapping controls, whatever you want to call it. Most people put the underscore thing that you see in every other document about Unreal. I'll put like IMC first person controls or whatever for input mapping context, and these will usually put IA for input action. I'm not doing that here because it's self-evident anyway, so I just tend not to do that. The editor handles telling you what they are anyway. It's just redundant, I believe, but whatever you want to do is totally fine. It doesn't matter. So we're going to open up this context that we made, and we have some mappings here. We're going to go ahead and start setting this up. You basically just click the plus, click what you want to do. We got forward. You can press this keyboard to do it quickly, or you can get a specific mapping. We're just going to go W, forward. See, the advantage here is now if you have some other control you want to put in here too, you can also go add another plus, put a gamepad key in here too. So you can basically do all your mappings in one place and handle multiple devices, multiple optional controls in one place. So it's very handy for that. We're just going to stick with the keyboard for now, but you can set these up to gamepad if you want. If you have a gamepad and want to test that out too, feel free. All right, so we got W. It's pretty standard. There's no modifiers. A W is just going to give a positive value of a 1 basically for when it's pressed down. That's all we really care about. But we also want to set underneath forward. This isn't a new mapping. This is under the forward mapping. We're going to add another optional hotkey, and this one's going to be S key. Basically just setting up the standard WASD setup. So we got a W and an S. Now an S is going to have a modifier on it, and modifier basically just does some math on the button, and for this one we're just going to negate. So it's going to be a -1 instead of a +1 basically, and that will handle basically going in reverse. We're done with that. We can set up a new mapping here, and we want to, I don't know why it expands that when we do. I think that's just a little bug. We want to set up strafe. It's going to be very similar to the forward stuff. We basically want to set up keyboard key D for right, and that's a positive value is how we're thinking it. So that's fine. And we need to think of it that way because you'll see in a second when we set it up. Yep, I pressed the plus, and for some reason it expanded this forward. Again, we can keep that collapsed. We don't need to look at it. All right, so we're going to set up A as well. And here for the modifiers, we want a negate for going the opposite direction, basically. All right, very good. So that is set up for moving forward, backwards, and strafing. So let's go back to our first person character. And set up on event begin play. First we want to get our controller basically, so we get player controller. This is basically from the world or the current level, and we're going to assert that it is a level relevant. That way we make sure we have the correct map loaded, like we have this actual blank level, right? And it's set up with this game mode 01, which has player controller 01. So when we load this world, we're going to expect this player controller to be a player controller 01. So we're going to cast it to player controller 01. Now if you just left your player controller default, you don't have to do a cast. But here we can now drag off this as player controller 01. Look for enhanced input local player subsystem. So this is what does the mapping context, and then we're going to drag off of this and add mapping context to this player subsystem. And we're only going to do it on a successful cast, so we'll drag off of that, and there's our first person mapping control. It should come up automatically. We did that correctly. Now we could put little messages. I like to do this just to make sure when we launch our game we can tell what's going on. First person mapping success. And you can change these a little bit if you want. I like to set the duration a little longer to make sure we don't miss it. And we're also going to make it green because this is like a success message. And on a failed, well, we want to say that it failed. So I'm just going to copy the string output and drag the failed to that and just put failed here. And make the text color red. There we go. And that'll just give us a little bit of a hint. We can collapse those down now. It's nice to do this when you're casting initially, just to make sure your game's working right and your castings are not failing, because sometimes it's kind of hard to tell they failed if you don't do this. And there we go. So we can make sure that mapping is successful. We could go ahead and launch the game and just see those messages, but we'll do a little more first just to keep it going, because that's pretty straightforward. What we want to do is, in our first person character, we want to handle these inputs. So we need to right click and add an event called input action. It's probably easiest to just search. So we'll search for forward. We're going to see a bunch of different things for forward vectors, etc. But what we're looking for is under input enhanced action event. There's also a value. Don't use the value, that's the wrong one in this case. So you want to look for the forward event. So basically whenever this context of forward is pressed, how do we handle it? That's all this is. And that is the triggered. Now if you expand this down, you'll see a bunch of other things which might be relevant at some times, but for something that's just being held down, triggered is typically the right one. And all we want to do on this triggered is add movement input. And the reason that this is available is because of this character movement component. So it works off of this character movement component that is pre-added to these characters. And all we want to do is take this action value, and that is the scale value. So if we're going backwards, it's going to be -1. If we're going forwards, it's 1. Now, world direction is what direction you want to send your character moving. And that is going to be based off of the camera. So whatever direction the camera is looking, that's what way we will also want to move. So we'll drag the camera here, and we're going to get forward vector. You could base it off of something else's forward if you're like allowing a look around but still moving in the same direction. Some games do. But this is a pretty straightforward case of, hey, whatever way the camera's looking, that's what way we're going to go. Now we also want to keep in mind that we really only want to deal with the X and Y here. We don't want to deal with the pitch. Is that the Z in this? I don't know. What you might want to do is, if you don't want to try to walk specifically downwards or walk specifically upwards, is keep one of them zeroed. That is that direction. And to do that, you can split these structs like so and only plug in certain ones. So now, yeah, we get the camera's forward vector. This should be enough to get the forward working. Let's go ahead and test the forward by compiling. Back to our level and hitting play. Okay, this is actually another thing we haven't set up yet. There's nothing going on here, and there is a reason for that. It is actually loading the level and working. It's just that we haven't spawned our character. So basically what we need to do here is we need to go to our world settings, go to our game mode. So our game mode is what we're doing our spawning with. So we go to our game mode here. Okay, let's go back to this world settings. We want to set up the default pawn. It's set to none. We want this to be the character we just made, so we can set it to that. Now you could say in our game mode it always spawns that by just going to the game mode having the default pawn. Have it here? Default pawn? Yeah, default pawn. Now it is set up now. Okay. FPS Care 1. But you want to make sure that's set right. And all that does is it makes sure that Unreal, wherever your player start is, it will spawn your default pawn there. So it's just kind of an Unreal thing. So if that's not spawning, make sure you got that set. Make sure you have a player start. Just some default Unreal stuff. Here we are in the level. So I'm going to hit W and assume we go forward. We do go forward. We just fell off the level. Okay, so those seem to work okay. We're going to handle the strafe as well by doing a similar thing. Find that input enhanced action value strafe. And we're going to do this basically almost the exact same thing, but instead of forward vector, we want the right vector, which is just pointing 90 degrees right of the camera. Same deal, we're basically just going to plug in this X and Y so that we don't try to move along with the pitch at all, because that would potentially generate odd results. It might not even be relevant in this case. The character controller might handle that automatically with some setting here. I don't know actually. But we're going to do the same thing with the scale value and plug that in as well, because when we're pressing A, it's negated and moving left. When we're pressing D, it's going to move right, which is the positive value. So that should work. So that should be enough to get our strafe going. We also have a look set up and a jump. So we'll go ahead and plug those in real quick, look and jump. And we'll just hit plus on the mappings. Let's add look first. This one's a cool one to know how to do. We would quit expanding these up. And look is just going to be mouse. So you can click on this. You'll find under mouse, there's a mouse XY 2D axis. That is perfect. That's what we want. And that's really all we need to do there is just add that. And then we just got to determine how it is handled. So the character controller comes with some pitch and yaw stuff already. So we should be able to just add the look action. We'll split that struct so we get an X and a Y. And on triggered, what do we want to do? We just basically want to add controller pitch input. Yeah, that's it. And we also want the yaw. Add yaw. So these come from that character movement. So the yaw is basically looking left to right. That's going to be the X value. So we're just going to plug that in and plug this in. And along the same line, we'll want to do the pitch, and that's going to be the Y value. So mouse only has X and Y. X is, of course, left and right, Y being up and down. And that should be all we have to do. I believe, if I remember correctly, I think it's going to be inverted by default. So I believe what we got to do is we got to negate or change this Y. So what I'm going to do is just multiply by -1. And if it's wrong, we'll change it back. Multiply by a -1, plug that in. So for the pitch, you gotta do that. So we've got a look and we've got some movement going off these vectors. So if you think about it, when you move around, your camera's going to move along with your character, and the forward vector is going to change, and also the right vector is going to change. So these forward and strafe should now adjust automatically, since this pitch is changing things at pitch and yaw. Let's go ahead and just press play on that and have a quick test. All right, very good. So move the mouse around here and we can see we're looking around. The up and down on the mouse are not working. So I'm not able to look up and down. What's going on there? Let's do a little troubleshooting. This is pretty normal to have to troubleshoot. And I'm going to do some investigating. Pause the video and back to you. All right, simple enough change. I basically just did a Google search of it and found this page here. So basically we need to set in your pawn to use the pawn controller rotation as well. And that is just under the details of pawn. So easy enough. Yeah, there it is. It's under camera. All right, use pawn control rotation. Should be good now. And I think it is going to be inverted, but we'll fix that here in a second. We just want to make sure this works first. Okay, we can look left and right. We can look up and down. It is inverted, so it is going kind of the wrong direction. All right, but we do need to negate this because it feels backwards. All right, there is just a negate float. I guess that's the exact same as times it by -1, so whatever. Let's just do that. Either way works. So that's all we need to do is make sure we get that camera setting, use pawn rotation. And that seems to be good. Let's go ahead and add the jump as the last one here. So we'll search jump. Now you see some stuff for jump. We don't want that. We want the action event jump, and when it's triggered, we're going to call jump. Now this is only here because it's pre-programmed with the character movement, and it is pretty much automatically handled, because programming jumps is pretty tricky to get right, so you might have to make your own if you're doing special case stuff, but we can just use the default one for now, and that is totally fine. Go ahead and jump into our world. I'm going to full screen it this time. We can look around. We can now jump, which doesn't seem to do anything. Oh, we didn't set it up. Duh. Okay, we got to go to the first purpose and mapping controls and add a mapping to jump. Or of course it's not going to work. Jump. We're going to use spacebar, and there we go. We don't need to add any modifiers. Let's close the game so it can save. Retry. There we go. Okay, so now that that's mapped, we should be able to actually jump. Okay, so we can look around, we can look up and down, we can jump. Jump seems to work. We can move about, as you would expect as a first-person controller to work. So we've got that all set up. Yeah, that's kind of the basics of getting a first-person controller set up. Now, like I said before, if you're using a different kind of controller, if you're not doing first-person, I would just recommend just looking it up. Now, we're going to talk about, very quickly here at the end, just adding a little bit to this first-person controller. I like to have some arms or something for your first-person mesh. We've got no mesh, so it's just blank. But what if we want to put some arms in there? So what we can do is just find some free models or make your own. Okay, so all I really did was just Google FPS Arms 3D model, and I found some here from Sketchfab. There's this one here. I went ahead and downloaded it already, but it's pretty easy to find. But I wanted to do a Google rather than give you an exact link, because there are a bunch of different ones, and maybe this won't be in the free in the future. Who knows? But you can download it. It's just these arms, and that's all we're going to use for now, because we're going to keep it real simple. But we do have to import it, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so I've got it here. I already unpacked it. I'm just going to double click that. We got sources and textures. We're going to make a new folder for this maybe. Let's just drag this to the side. So let's go back to our top level here, and we're just going to make a folder called models, I guess. Try to be a little organized. And we'll just make like a folder called FPS Arms. And we might have multiple of these as we go, so I'm just going to make another folder called 01. And we're going to drag in this FBX. I guess I'll show it on screen here. We got an FBX in here. And we get this import context here. I'm just going to leave it all default for now and hit import. And it's going to bring everything in. Now, what it didn't bring in was the textures. So we got to go over to textures, and let's just drag those in as well. Maybe we want a textures folder, but since they're specific to these arms, we're going to put it in the same folder. And it gave us the default Unreal stuff. We got a skeletal mesh here we can open up and modify a little bit. This is like the default Unreal texture stuff, which looks like mutant arms or anything or something. And that's not exactly what we want. So we're going to have to modify that a little bit. Let's close out this other stuff for a second. So if we go to our material here that it's using, we'll have to modify this material just a little bit. Let's make its own thing. This is its default setup, and it has, let's see, a base color, metallic, specular, roughness, normal. So these are basically shader stuff, and it's just kind of got some auto thing. So since we have textures, we can just drag in our own textures for these. We don't really want to use this stuff that it's using. Got a base color here. Base color is just going to be this color one. You can drag this in as a texture sample. Just take the RGB straight into there. I think we want to get rid of this diffuse color map. Actually, maybe we could just drag it in here to this lerp. Just kind of use their math that they're already doing. So improvising a little bit here. Let's just see how that looks. Okay. And they've got some color weights and some other various things going on here. But we're using our texture instead of the one they auto brought in. So that should be fine. And if you want to just drag it in directly, you can, but they're just doing some shininess and stuff. So we might as well use what they're using. And we've also got some other things we can set up. We've got a normal, so we can take our normal and bring it in. There's the normal map from that. We're gonna just replace it with ours. So let's just delete that and bring in ours. And let's see, what else do we have provided? We have a roughness. So I think we'll just replace this roughness entirely, I guess. I'm just going to bring in this roughness directly. That'll break that one. That should be fine. And we've also got an ambient occlusion, which will help with some shadowing. There's nothing there, so I'll add something that'll make it look a little bit better. There we have updated the material. You can already kind of tell it's looking a little better based on this ball. So now we should be able to open up these arms, and they should be looking a little better here, looking a little better. So you might have to do that if you're importing models. You might have to mess with them a little bit. Okay, so we've got those imported. We can go back to our first person character, and under this character mesh, we'll just set this mesh to those arms. FPS arms. Then we can go to our viewport and make sure it looks okay. As you can see, it's rotated incorrectly, so we can just fix that real quick with a rotation. I believe it's going to be -90 here on the Z, and that looks good. Now we also might want to adjust our camera or adjust these arms to try to kind of fit with the camera. We'll just have to play around with it a little bit and see how it looks. It might take some tweaking to get these arms to look right. So we've got some arms. Move around. Now the arms look pretty weird, and they also cast a weird shadow, so you're just going to have to adjust. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our first person character, go back to these arms, and look for cast shadow and just turn that off. You don't want it to cast shadow because that looks weird, and they look a little janky and weird. I think we're just going to scale them up a little bit here in our case, maybe move them back a little bit. Just kind of try to get it to look like a proper head view, at least slightly. And this is just going to take some trial and error, or maybe you already know some cool tricks for this or something, but it's one of those things that it's just going to take a little bit of messing around with to get it to look right. But now we do have some arms. Now our looking up and down seems a little weird to me. I feel like the arms should move with it. And that's something you could do. You could say on that look event, move the arms as well. But for now, we've at least got this initial setup. Got jump. Got some arms. Obviously the arms don't animate, that's a whole nother thing. Let's look at this event graph. So yeah, if you wanted to move the arms along with it, I think you could just go, so maybe we drag in the camera and get its world rotation instead. Just try that real quick, I guess. Yeah, we're doing a roll thing here, so that's not quite right. But we're on the right track. Maybe we do rotation instead of, I don't know. It seems like it should be pitch, but there's some translation here I'm missing here. And if you know, leave a comment. Feel free. There we go. We actually got it. It's just backwards. So maybe if we just times this by -1, doing a little inversion here. Will that take care of it? I don't know why it's roll instead of pitch, but there's some mathematical reason there in the 3D math. It's not always easy to understand unless you're really in deep in understanding everything that's happening, because sometimes things translate, and yeah, it looks like we got it going on. So when you look up and down now, okay, we'll leave that. That's kind of good enough. We actually got the hands kind of moving with it, which looks cool. It looks kind of how it should be. It ain't perfect, but it's a start. So there we go. That's kind of cool too. And if you're doing weird stuff like this where people might not understand what you're doing, you can leave a comment like this. You just highlight everything you want to comment, press C, and boom, you get that. Some things are really obvious, and I don't think they need a comment, but stuff like this, maybe someone might look at this and be like, what the heck is this doing? I don't even know, but with a comment you can kind of figure it out a little bit. All right, well, hope you've enjoyed and learned something and can get some initial movement up and going. We'll see you in the next one. Matt out.